Good afternoon and welcome to this week's edition of Road to the White House. Momentarily, Tom Luce, former campaign chairman for the Perot for President campaign, will be joining us from Dallas. There are a few technical problems that are being worked out between here and there. So in the meantime, we're going to take a few minutes to take your phone calls about your reaction to the news that Ross Perot was not going to be a candidate for president. You'll see the numbers at the bottom of your screen. And again, this reminder, as soon as that connection is made with Dallas, we'll have Tom Luce here to take your questions and comments. Before then, though, Orlando, what did you think of the news?
Well, my question for Mr. Luce is not really why, but I guess more as a statement that if Mr. Perot, who I've admired for a long time, even when he was on the board of General Motors, one thing I'd like to see him do is to come through with his program as he would have outlined it under his platform, and making sure that we understand how bad a shape this country is in financially and what is really needed to see that the Democrats and Republican administration does carry out those programs.
Thanks for the call. We're about ready to go to Dallas, though. Before that, Monmouth, New Jersey.
Yes. My concern is this. The pro-volunteers are still so excited, and neither of the two parties are really addressing their issues, the deficit, the humility agenda, industrial policy, the paperwork, the burden on small business, for instance. And the way Pro pulled out, I don't know how they're going to get the leverage in order to get the parties to address the issues. And I urge all Pro volunteers not to go over easily to these parties, that we have really got to let them know that we are not going to submit to negative campaigning and that we're going to vote on the issues.
Thanks for the call, New Jersey. Appreciate you taking the time, and we now have those problems worked out. Tom Luce, former campaign chairman for Perot for president. Why did Ross Perot almost run for president? Why did he decide not to?
Well, I think in both instances, he was motivated by what he thought was in the best interest of the country. He felt very strongly that the agenda that was being debated in the presidential election needed to be changed. He felt strongly that the issues were not being discussed. And I think but more importantly, the volunteers across the country forced these items onto the nation's agenda. The reason why he announced that he was not going to be a candidate, I think also he made clear he felt, given the circumstances, it would no longer be in the best interest of the country for him to remain a candidate for the reasons he explained.
Can you give us some insight into that decision-making process over the, say, 48 hours before the announcement was made?
Oh, you know, I can't give you a blow-by-blow description because that decision was made by Mr. Perot. I think, as he explained, Ross is an engineer by background. He took what he considered to be an analytical approach to the problem. He analyzed it and made a decision that I believe was based upon his sincere belief of what was in the best interest of the country. Now,
as those discussions were going on among the staff, what was your advice at the time?
Well, I think, you know, my advice and the other campaign advisors and all of that, I don't think that was the principal focus of how Ross Perot made up his mind. I mean, you know, early on, I told some of the people that joined the campaign, I said, you need to understand this is not a candidate who needs 3x5 cards. This is a candidate that is perfectly capable of making up his own mind, and I think in this instance he made up his own mind. You know, those on the campaign team, we were always geared up, ready to go, always wanting to go to battle the next day, but I think Ross sat down and analyzed the situation objectively, analytically, and did what he thought was in the best interest of the country. I'd like to add, you know, before I came on the air, I heard I think your first caller, talk about the importance of talking about this economic agenda that the country needs to face and what some of the solutions are, and I think you'll see Ross talking about that.
When did you first know that the decision had been made?
I knew the night before. I met with Mr. Perot the night before, and And he outlined to me his thinking and told me what he had concluded, and that's when I found out.
How did you feel?
Oh, I felt, I'm sure, a little bit like each of the volunteers across the country. I had some disappointment. I was, we were all geared up to engage in this presidential selection process. I felt a sense of disappointment. But again, I've known Ross a long time, and I sincerely believe that he was doing what he thought was the right thing. So, I got over the disappointment based upon my belief in his good faith intentions.
We understand that on Thursday after the news conference that you spoke with several hundred of the folks in the headquarters there in Dallas. What did you tell them?
Well, I told them that I knew that how they felt. I knew how disappointed they were. I felt the same way. But on the other hand, I wanted all of us to focus on what we had accomplished in this country and the fact that the work was not done. See, I think that's the important thing. I think the way to look at this is what the movement accomplished versus what would not have happened in this country if it hadn't have started. Now you see, now you have millions of people across the country who are talking about on their own, from the grassroots level, how can we band together, how can we keep the pressure on. This movement was not the movement of one man. This was a movement created by the people. I think it will be sustained by the people, and I think they now feel empowered. Ross Perot said very early on, we have a set of problems that could not be solved by Solomon. And he said, who is responsible for this? And he said, look in the mirror, it's all of us. And it's going to take all of us to fix it. And in its own way, it may be good that this will refocus the attention back on the people all across this country who have to band together and solve the problem. They have to force the political parties to revitalize themselves, to address these issues like the budget deficit, but not only address them, but begin to not only use the rhetoric, but talk about how they're going to solve it.
You suggest that this was about a movement of ideas and not a person in particular, and yet in the news reports today, a lot of people were expressing frustration and anger, and just one quote from many. This is a story in the New York Times. Mike Norris, a coordinator for the campaign in Los Angeles, said, "We were betrayed. How many times have we heard him say, 'Climb in the ring'? He got us all to climb in the ring, but he never got in himself." What do you say to those people that are having those feelings?
Well, what I say to those people is what I've been saying to some people who have phoned and talked to me today on all sides of the issues, good, bad, we're glad he did it, not glad he did it. I understand the feelings that they're going through today. A lot of people have put a lot of effort into this movement, and I understand their sense of disappointment. But again, I would emphasize, I think in the long run, again, what is going to solve the nation's problems is a grassroots movement, a change in the way and what we expect of our political parties, what we expect of our leaders. And I think you're going to find that millions of people have been energized by this movement, and I would predict for you that the vast majority of those people will remain energized and that they will make a difference in this country.
Good afternoon and welcome to this week's edition of Road to the White House. We invite you to join in our discussion. You're going to see the phone numbers at the bottom of your screen if you're in the Eastern or Central Time Zone, 202-628-2525, and if you're out west, 202-783-2727. We invite your questions and comments for Tom Luce, the former campaign chairman of the Perot for President movement. Mr. Luce, what did you get out of this personally? What do you felt you've gained from this experience?
Oh gosh, I gained so much from this experience. I learned so much from the people in the field. I mean, I was amazed. When this started, I was one of the ones that said to Ross, "Good golly, Ross, how in the world will people overcome all these obstacles in the various states? How in the world are they going to get your name on the ballot? Gee, don't you know that, you need this, you need that, it won't happen." People really grabbed hold. The word empowered gets overused in today's vernacular, but this was truly a case of of empowerment. People grabbed the ball, they did it, they self-organized themselves, they got behind it. I also learned a lot about the many, many issues that face this country. I learned a lot about the gridlock in this country. I looked at it close. I looked at what's causing. Let's take health care for a minute. In this country, we have been debating and saying that we want to do something about health care since the days of Harry Truman. And we're really no further along now than we were then. Today, we spend roughly 12% of our GNP on health care. Japan spends 6% of their health care. And yet we have 35 million people that don't have access to health care because of insurance reasons. And so I began to look at why does this happen? And it becomes very clear. It's not a case of needing 17-point programs. All the programs are lined up. We've got the Canadian model, we've got the German model, we've got the Democratic model, we've got the Republican model. But what we've got is we've got special interests lined up, each behind each one of those models. The political parties play to the special interests. They play to the extremes of an issue. No one's willing to reach across, grab the consensus, make it happen. I think we have some fundamental problems that are going to be there until this movement grows and grows and grows and people say, whoops, that's enough. Let's start solving these problems.
Arlington, Virginia. Good evening.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Kim and I'm calling from Arlington, Virginia. I've been one of the Perot supporters because I was disappointed at the President Bush's foreign policy. Now Perot is not in the race, but I know that I will not vote for Clinton. First, Democrats are nothing but funny buying voters with big government spending program. Democrats have passion and have not proved passion with policy for the people whom they say care. Bill Clinton and Senator Al Gore last night tried to speak with their best talent to speak passionately with the words, but I've not heard any one bit sound of passion that Mr. Ross Perot yelled.
Thanks, Arlington, for the call. Tom Luce, the caller, talked about Democrats. Is one party or the other going to benefit more from this?
Well, I think that's up to the political parties. I think what you're going to hear from most of the callers, and you heard from one of your earlier callers before I came on the air, and it basically was, look, I want them to make sure that they pay attention to what I'm saying. I think it's up to the political parties. Now, I think you're going to see both political parties, the Republicans, the Democrats. They're going to set out to appeal to the people in this movement, and I think that's going to be a focus of attention for the next 60 or 90 days. And I think that you will see both political parties begin to say, okay, what can we do to address these concerns that are being expressed by this movement?
Van Nuys, California. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, my name's Tony from Van Nuys.
You're on. Go ahead.
Okay, I just want to say that I'm elated that Ross Perot has decided not to run. I was concerned that Mr. Perot would try to turn a republic into a democracy with his gizmo town hall concept. I'm also was quite terrified by the education comments he made in 1983 about kids with learning disabilities or kids who couldn't learn at all. So it is quite a relief, and I'm looking forward to the two-party system, and I do see how it's a correct system and one that should be cherished.
Tom Luce.
Well, I'm glad I have the opportunity to reply to what I consider to be two distortions that have taken place in this presidential selection process. First, with respect to the town hall, what Ross Perot proposed is nothing more than a refinement in technology of fireside chats used by FDR when he would talk to the people of this country and urge them to write their congressman. I mean, what Ross Perot was proposing was really no difference except an update in technology. Ross Perot made clear that he foresaw the town hall as a way of building a participatory debate in this country to get people involved in issues where people could have an informed judgment as opposed to an opinion. He never saw it in any way whatsoever as any form of plebiscite or voting on an issue. He saw it as a way to involve the people, and I think there's never a danger of people knowing more about their government. Second, with respect to, again, a distortion with respect to what Mr. Perot said about children with learning disabilities in 1983. Look at the record. You have one comment taken out of context that was talking about we need more funding for gifted and talented children. A later paragraph talked about more funding for children with learning disabilities. But let's look at the record. What Ross Perot did in 1984, as opposed to 1983, was fight for a complete overhaul of the system for every child in Texas, every child, whether they were so-called gifted and talented or so-called learning disability. He fought for an improvement of the education system for every child in Texas, from whatever part of Texas they were from, and the central thesis of his education reform bill was every single child can learn, and it is the function of our school system to make sure that every child has the opportunity to maximize their God-given talents.
Morrisville, Pennsylvania. Good afternoon.
Hello. I have a two-part question. One is, what will happen if Ross Perot's supporters still choose to write him in November, and he still takes 35 to 40% of the vote, and nobody really wins? Will he then honor the wishes of the people as he promised all along, or is he still going to say he doesn't want to do it? And secondly, is he willing to reimburse all of us for the money we've spent for campaign, and all these petition signings that we've had to do?
Thank you for the call. Tom Luce.
Well, I think the scenario that the lady talked about the House of Representatives is the one that Ross spoke to, and I think he spoke to it in a way that was clear and concise and laid out his feelings. I think he feels strongly that the problems of this country require the building of a majority. They require the action that would be necessitated by our economic problems, which really he doesn't think ought to be put on hold by a debate in the House of Representatives about who ought to be president.
She also asked about reimbursement. Many calls to the program yesterday, people talked about how much not only of their time but of their own money that they invested in this effort.
Well, I think a lot of people, including Ross, invested a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of effort. And I think, again, the movement has accomplished a lot. I think, the campaign has also invested a lot of money in the effort. And I think that most people feel that what was accomplished has been good for this country, and we're not through.
Moreno Valley, California. Good afternoon.
Thank you. I sure have been trying to get in. You people, I hate to say it that way, but they have really done an injustice to themselves. I watched the Democratic Party and their Democratic nominations and all of that. They're not going to follow through. Reason why, think for a second. Why would Ross Perot follow these guys that they set up there and they try to tell him to do it this way and that way? He can't lie. He's the cancer, just like me. The politicians lie all the time. That's why he pulled out. He's not a liar. He's told people how he feels. He knows right now that the country is hurting so bad, it's going to hurt more. The colored people have hurt themselves so bad, they'll never come out of this. It'll take them another 20 years without Ross Perot, and I feel sorry for him. I feel sorry for the United States. Thank you.
Tom Luce?
Well, I had a bad connection there. I'm not sure I caught all of the gentleman's comment. I think I have most of the thrust of his comment. And again, I think a lot of people are concerned about the absence of a leader like Ross. But I think, again, the whole issue boils down to what we, the people, are going to do. And I think the power will come from all of the people being involved, remaining involved, not giving up on the system, forcing change in the system. You can force change, if you will, from the outside. You can force change into the system. And I think there are going to be a lot of people who are going to remain involved and keep pushing on these issues because there are some serious problems that face our country. But again, I'm an optimistic soul, and I think the people of this country have the strength and the will to do something about these problems.
Washington, D.C., good evening.
Hello, how are you?
Good.
Good.
Fine,
It's
sir.
my first time getting through on C-SPAN. I got to tell you how much I love C-SPAN. I think you guys are doing a terrific job.
Thanks for the call.
I live in Montgomery County, Maryland, and I was a Ross Perot supporter. I'm disappointed he's not going to run. But now I'm going to be a Clinton supporter because I think he's the best chance for us to really make some change in this country. And Mr. Perot hasn't given us any hint of what he's going to do, if he's going to support anybody. And I just wanted to know if Tom Luce had any idea on that and what he thinks about me supporting Clinton. And then
Thanks for the call.
Well, I think every person who is involved in the Perot movement needs to get involved, make their decision after they've examined the candidates closely, examined the positions that they've taken. I think everybody has to make up their own mind. I think that's part of what we're talking about here is people getting involved, making an informed judgment. And I congratulate this gentleman for saying that, you know, he's going to get involved and make up his own mind. I think that's what everybody has to do.
Fort Worth, good afternoon.
Fort Worth?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, yes. Still am a Perot supporter. I'm a Democrat. My husband's Republican. He also is a Perot supporter. And we're not angry. We're disappointed, but we still support him. We think he has some real good ideas. And I think he's a fine, honorable person, and I think the press treated him horrendous. They asked him really inane questions, and he never did get to address the main thrust of his message, which was jobs and education. And I think that probably wore him down.
Thanks for the...
We still admire him, and we're not angry with him at all.
Thanks for the call. Tom Luce, the caller mentioned the press in one of the stories, a Perot employee, there's no name, was quoted as saying, he definitely thinks the media has been on his case and he just didn't need that. What do you think of the media coverage?
Well, you know, what I think is that most people in America, most people in the press, and most people in the public think the presidential selection process doesn't work very well. I don't think it comes as a great secret to anybody. You know, we spend an awful lot of time in a presidential selection process talking about someone's Cub Scout demerit badges or what they did in 1958 or what they said in 1961 or whatever, as opposed to debating these substantive issues. I'm not sure I know the answer. I believe very strongly in a free press. That's certainly their right and their prerogative. You know, I think eventually, though, C-SPAN is the forerunner of some of the changes you began to see this year. I mean, you saw the commercial networks begin to have 2-hour shows, 1-hour shows, begin to let people talk to the candidates. You know, I think that's one of the other accomplishments of this movement is that we are forcing a change in the way the presidential selection process works. I hope for the good of the country that that continues. I think we do have we have a destructive presidential selection process, in my judgment. I don't say that, not that it's not directed to, unfortunately, I think it's directed to most of the candidates in the process. But I don't think it's a very healthy process right now. But I'm confident that, again, people can overcome that. I think if they demand a different sort of presidential selection process, that is exactly what they'll get.
Woodlake, California. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I have a question for Mr. Luce as the campaign manager. I was disappointed that Ross Perot dropped out of the election because I thought he could make some changes. However, I was puzzled throughout the entire thing as to what changes he could make, considering that he would have to work with the Congress that is presently there, or the incoming Congress. And I was wondering, as campaign manager, did you ever have any plans of running a slate, Perot slate, such as, you know, have congressmen run from each state? So if there were a groundswell of support, at least you would have people in who could support his ideals.
I appreciate the nature of your comments. We did spend time discussing that issue. We were urged by many people across the country to create a third party. We did not think that was practical in the amount of time that there was before the presidential selection process. We felt there was enough of a burden and a job to take on building a national organization to support one candidate, let alone candidates across the country. And I continue to think, and I said during every phase of the campaign, that I felt this movement could be one that energized the two major parties to get them to change in the way they are responding to issues. And I still believe that's the best route, although good people of good minds would make the argument that you make. I believe that if you look throughout our history, we have, when the time is right, we have re-energized, revitalized each of our major parties from time to time, and I think that may be what's happening now.
Moorestown, New Jersey. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I think the problem with Perot was that he was a man without, not only didn't even have a plan or a program, he doesn't have any political philosophy. He attracted the deaf, dumb, and blind of political naivete. I'm a libertarian. He could have put $5, $10, $15, $20 million at a libertarian party and made real impact. Here are people, we've had proposals and programs for seriously restructuring the government for years before Perot ever surfaced from his office. Fine, he's a good businessman. We need lots of that. On the local level in New Jersey, none of the Perot people have come out to change politics from the bottom up. If they like to, they can come to New Jersey to Trenton on Monday, where we're trying to get an initiative referendum bill through. But that's the way that I think most people will eventually, as history shows, will view Perot. He's sort of like the coitus interruptus of politics.
Tom Luce.
Well, I respectfully disagree with the gentleman. I believe very strongly that Ross Perot did have a strong political philosophy. He's a can-do guy. I'm convinced he would have presented a very good program for this country if he had remained in the race, and I just disagree with the caller.
Mesa, Arizona. Good afternoon.
Is this Mesa?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Luce, I want to congratulate you on a fine campaign that you and Mr. Perot ran. I myself would probably not have voted for him, but because I did honestly peruse the slate that was being presented by everyone. But I feel some of the dynamics of this process has been hurt a little bit by his dropping out. I know the disappointment around the country is felt by everyone, but I would like to say that those people who came out of the woodworks to support him, if they were to form their own coalition and have somebody lead them, they would be a voting bloc to deal with, much like what Jerry Bowen has put together, Jesse Jackson. I think there's a future for this block of voting. I'd like your comment on that. Oh, incidentally, C-SPAN has given communication a freedom, a viewing freedom for people that is awesome. I can't believe this educational process isn't going on in more depth. Thank you, sir.
Well, let me start with the second part of your question or statement. As I said earlier, I really agree about the current power and the potential power of C-SPAN, and I very much laud what they are doing. With respect to the first part of the question, again, I believe that you're going to see people across the country step forward in their own way to provide their own leadership, not centered around an individual, but centered around this movement. I think you will see people that will, again, stay in the process, get in the process, keep forcing the parties to change. I think that what has been done is progress. And obviously, I don't think the job is finished, but I think we're a whole lot better off today. The process is better off today than it was February 19th, the day before this started.
Burke, Virginia. Good afternoon.
Yes, I'm calling from Burke, Virginia, as you just said. I'd worked very hard for Perot, as quite a few people out here in Northern Virginia have. I was very much in favor of getting him in. This gave most of us an opportunity, I thought, to get it really truly involved in the political movement. In other words, the way it stands right now with the political parties, people such as myself, we really have no say as to what goes on. That's gone in the party. And I'm deeply disappointed in Mr. Perot and, frankly, in how this affects, or in my mind, how this makes his character look. He sends Mr. Luce here excusing Mr. Perot cutting out on this thing by saying that he's really greatly helped the party and the political system. He certainly has not. He just cut and ran. Mr. Luce ducked the question of the caller before who said, gee, I've spent all this money, what should I do? And he said, oh, well, you know, we kind of, and then just wandered around the question. I'm really disappointed that he has a lawyer on here fronting and, frankly, giving him cover.
Thanks for the call, Burke.
Well, let me say, again, I respectfully disagree. One, Ross Perot didn't ask me to come on here today. C-SPAN asked me to come on today, and I'm happy to come on. Mr. Perot is on television himself tonight on a commercial network on CNN, taking calls. Mr. Perot is not ducking and hiding anywhere. Mr. Perot is very capable of speaking for himself and has on numerous occasions. So I hardly think it's a case of Mr. Perot sending his lawyer or his friend to speak for him.
Before coming to this particular political endeavor, Tom Luce in 1988 was Chief Justice Pro Tem of the Texas Supreme Court, and in 1990 was a candidate for the Republican nomination for governor in Texas. Next call is from Hollywood, California. Good afternoon.
Hello. My name is Marilyn. I'm a black American, okay? And I was with Mr. Perot. I thought for sure that we could get out there and do something. And all I want to say to all the Perot voters, don't give them what they want so quickly. Make them crawl. If we're going to Republican or Democrat, we were out there for a reason. We did not like the Republicans, period. They're the one that has gotten us in this mess that we are in now. So if we're going to go anywhere, let's go toward Democrat, but if not, let's stay together and create a force that they will have to reckon with.
Thanks, Hollywood, for the call. Tom Luce.
Well, again, I think the lady who called in is expressing a feeling that a lot of people have. I think you're going to see a lot of people in the movement who are going to say, convince me, persuade me. The two major party candidates, persuade me. And I don't see anything wrong with that at all. I think that's every American's prerogative to do so, and I think it's the obligation of the two major candidates to go persuade the Americans who haven't made up their mind. I think that's part of the process and very healthy.
Washington, D.C., good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'd like to basically say that now that Mr. Perot has Clinton and Bush eating out of his hands, so to speak, I'd like Mr. Luce to answer this question. How does he anticipate this new relationship with the powers that be for Mr. Perot affecting his ability to collect on that $150 million subsidy for his Dallas-Fort Worth airport project? You think this will put him in good stead to collect at the taxpayer's expense on that private benefit? I'll hang up and listen.
I'm not sure I caught all of the question. I believe it had to do with Alliance Airport, which let me say is a city-owned project. It is a project that has $600 million of private capital in it, not counting land. It is a project that has created thousands and thousands, probably somewhere near already 10 to 15,000 jobs in an area where thousands of defense workers are being laid off. It is a model project that has brought jobs and good jobs to people in this area. So I think it's a very, very good project. It is a project that was supported by the local government, by the state government, and by the federal government before Mr. Perot's candidacy, and I fully expect it will continue to be supported, as it should. It's a project that's creating jobs, and it's a project that has an enormous amount of private capital in it, and a project that has taken a small amount of public funding. And let me point out, virtually every airport in the United States has public funds in it. So I think it's a very laudatory project.
Tom Luce will be with us for a little less than 10 more minutes. San Marcos, Texas. Good afternoon.
Yes, Mr. Luce. What I wanted to state, first of all, I'm not necessarily a Perot supporter, and I hadn't decided who I was going to vote for yet, but I feel a lot of disappointment along with the rest of his supporters because I feel that Mr. Perot had the unique opportunity to set a modern-day precedent for the selection process for president. I don't believe the American public would put up with the Congress selecting a president. But if he had taken it a little further and pressed the issue, I think this would have come out and maybe we could have changed the process.
Well, I believe that Ross Perot made the decision he did in good faith, good intentions, based upon what he thought was in the best interest of the country. I think, obviously, in a decision of that kind and character and magnitude, other people might have looked at it, put themselves in his shoes, and made a different judgment. But I believe he did what he thought, what he sincerely believed was in the best interest of the country. I think his intentions were proper, and I think in his own mind he made the right decision.
Gainesville, Florida. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm sorry that it's so difficult to get through to you. A woman called a little earlier and asked if everybody votes for Ross Perot, would he run? Would he accept the nomination? And I want you to know that my wife and I didn't sleep a wink last night. We were so upset over the fact that he resigned. And how in the world can we select either Bush or Clinton? How in the world can we believe anything that anyone says? How could Ross ask us and even make the statement that there's been a change made? There's nothing changed. They're just conversationalists. He was the epitome of change. These people are just people. They make promises. I would ask you this question, sir. If I could guarantee you health benefits, guarantee you jobs, guarantee you lower taxes, wouldn't you vote for me for president? I mean, it's the most ridiculous thing, and he's putting us into a position where we're going to have to choose between the devil and the deep blue sea. It's terrible.
Thank you, Florida. Tom Luce?
Well, again, I understand that attitude, that sense of where we are in the process. But again, I would say that I sincerely believe, and I believe if we look at it objectively, we have made progress from where we were on February 19th. Have we finished the job? No. But I think we've made progress from February 19th forward, and I think we can continue to make progress if people will persist. And I believe, based upon the volunteers that I have talked to, that they will persist in insisting upon change, not just words, but change and results. And will it get done in 1992? I don't know. But I believe if the movement continues to grow and people begin if they continue to keep the pressure on, that we will force real change.
Placerville, California. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Lucy.
Good afternoon.
I'm calling in regards for Mr. Perot, and I feel that I'm like everybody else in America, and I'm mad as hell that he dropped out. I think that he was a great hope for this country, and that I think that voting for Mr. Clinton, he's giving a lot of promises and everything else, and I think that our country is going to be in a little bit of trouble here if he goes through with some of his plans, especially for small businessmen and large companies and things. He's talking about increases in taxes on certain percentages. It's going to throw a great big wrench in a lot of different things. We're going to have a lot of unemployment, more of it, and I think it's just going to be a big mess. And I know a lot of people that are really kind of undecided now. A lot of group of people that I know are not even going to vote this year.
Thanks for the call.
Well, I think clearly one of the issues that we haven't talked about that I think is important to talk about is the impact of governmental policies on small business in this country. The economic engine that creates jobs is small business. We're not creating jobs in our larger companies, and we probably won't for some time. It's small business that really creates jobs. We've got to cut down the regulatory burdens that are on our small business. We've got to create the incentives for a small business to grow. We've got to deal with our debt so that there are more savings to invest. That's how we're going to create jobs, and I couldn't agree more that that's the engine, small business. We've got to address those concerns. And again, I think that's part of what needs to be part of the agenda of this movement.
Springfield, Virginia. Good afternoon.
Yeah, I have two questions. Ross Perot promised that he would run if this movement got him on all 50 states on the ballot. And now, do you feel that he would be legally obligated to run if this happened? And question number two, is he going to use this as a mailing list and sell it to try to recoup his money he spent? I'd like to hear your answer to this.
I'm sorry, can you tell me the last part of the question about a mailing list?
The second question was whether or not this list of volunteers might be used as some kind of a mailing list to look for contributions to reimburse for the cost of what he's spent so far.
No, Mr. Perot has not sought political contributions in this campaign effort.
And his first question was about his initial statement about if he was on all 50 ballots, and several callers have mentioned, suggesting volunteers keep working and keep voting. So I guess the question would be, if elected, would he serve?
Well, I don't know that Mr. Perot has addressed that issue. I took his statement to be a definitive statement that he was not going to be a candidate and thus would not serve. I mean, I think realistically we have to look at not a hypothetical question, but the reality, and I don't think somebody's going to be elected president who has said he doesn't want to be a candidate for president.
I wanted to ask you about quote one of Mr. Perot's media advisors, Jim Squires, in one of the stories today said, "I didn't think Ross Perot was a politician when I came to work for him, and I'm even more sure today that he's not a politician, but I think he would have been a very good president." Is it possible for someone who's not a politician to be elected president?
I hope so. I think that most Americans would agree that we're not looking for someone who is just a politician to be president of the United States. I think it takes more. And I would certainly hope the answer to that question is no, that someone who is not a politician can be elected president of the United States.
Let me close by asking a little bit about your plans. We've talked about what the volunteers might be doing, what Ross Perot might do. What's the next step for you? Several years ago, you were a candidate yourself. What's next in your political life?
Oh, I'm going to go back to work and try to make a living and take care of business and take care of my family and go back to practicing law.
Tom Luce is the former campaign chairman of the Perot for President effort. Thank you very much, Mr. Luce, for taking time with us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me, and I appreciate the callers calling in.
We're going to continue to take calls, getting more of your response and reaction to events of the past few days. You see the numbers at the bottom of your screen. If you've called in the past 30